On a cold Wednesday afternoon in December 2008, inside a sprawling penthouse overlooking Manhattan's East Side, a 70-year-old titan of Wall Street stood before his two adult sons and delivered a sentence that instantly dissolved 4 decades of financial history. Bernard Lawrence Madoff, a former chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange and one of the most revered figures in modern finance, looked at Mark and Andrew Madoff and admitted that his entire investment empire was nothing more than a giant lie. He was not managing tens of billions of dollars in elite market strategies. He was not beating the market with unmatched mathematical precision. In reality, there were no investments, no stock purchases, no proprietary algorithms, and no clever hedging strategies. For decades, he had been paying off old investors using the incoming cash of new victims in a textbook Ponzi scheme inflated to astronomical, unprecedented proportions. By the time the illusion collapsed the following morning under the weight of the global financial crisis, the paper value of the accounts under his control stood at roughly $65 billion. It was, and remains, the single largest financial fraud in human history, a phantom empire built entirely on prestige, exclusivity, and an unshakable human desire to believe in magic. To understand how a single man deceived global banks, international aristocrats, Ivy League endowments, legendary philanthropists, and thousands of retirees, one must look back to the origins of Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. Founded in 1960 with $5,000 earned from working as a lifeguard on Long Island and installing sprinkler systems, Madoff began his career as a scrappy penny stock trader on the fringes of Wall Street. He was ambitious, hyper-focused, and deeply attuned to the mechanics of trading technology. At a time when stock trading was dominated by shouted orders on the chaotic floor of the New York Stock Exchange, Madoff was among the earliest pioneers of automated, electronic order processing. He invested heavily in computer technology, building a market-making firm that could execute trades faster and cheaper than traditional floor brokers. By paying smaller brokerage firms a fraction of a cent per share to route their customer orders through his systems, a controversial practice known as payment for order flow, Madoff accumulated vast volume. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, his firm was processing up to 10% of all trades on the New York Stock Exchange. He became an architect of the modern electronic marketplace, serving as chairman of the Nasdaq board and earning a reputation as a visionary who helped democratize trading technology. This legitimate market-making business served as the ultimate shield for the sinister operation brewing quietly beneath it. To regulators, auditors, and institutional investors, Bernie Madoff was not an offshore speculator or a flashy corporate raider, he was a foundational pillar of Wall Street architecture. His firm occupied multiple floors in the iconic Lipstick Building on 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. The market-making operation operated on the 19th floor with state-of-the-art computer screens, buzzing trading desks, and dozens of young traders making legitimate markets. But 2 floors down, on the 17th floor, existed a completely separate world. The 17th floor was accessible only to a tiny, tightly controlled circle of loyalists. It was locked away behind keypads and heavy doors, housing antique IBM computer systems, dot matrix printers, and employees whose sole job was not trading stocks, but fabricating an elaborate, multi-decade theatrical performance of success. The pitch that drew billions of dollars into Madoff's wealth management arm was deceptively simple and remarkably modest. Unlike typical fraudsters who promise absurd, overnight returns of 50 or 100%, Madoff promised something far more dangerous: consistency. His purported strategy was known as the split-strike conversion. In theory, Madoff bought a basket of 30 to 35 blue-chip stocks from the Standard & Poor's 100 index, mirroring the performance of corporate giants like Apple, ExxonMobil, and General Electric. To protect against market downturns, he claimed to buy put options, which gave him the right to sell stocks at a specific price if the market plummeted. To fund those options, he sold call options, capping his potential upside in exchange for downside protection. On paper, it was a conservative, highly disciplined strategy designed to capture steady gains while eliminating major losses. Year after year, decade after decade, through the Black Monday crash of 1987, the dot-com bust of 2000, and the aftermath of September 11, Madoff's investment advisory arm reported smooth, steady returns averaging between 10 and 12% annually. It did not matter if the broad market plunged 30% or skyrocketed 40%, Madoff's charts were a straight, unbroken diagonal line rising steadily toward the sky. To high-net-worth investors, this consistency was the holy grail of finance. It offered the high returns of equities with the stability of a government bond. Madoff did not advertise. He did not issue flashy press releases or cold call clients. Instead, he engineered a psychological masterclass in manufactured scarcity and social proof. Madoff cultivated an aura of absolute exclusivity. He turned away wealthy individuals who begged him to take their money, telling them that his fund was closed to new investors or that he was taking on new capital only as a personal favor. This artificial scarcity triggered an insatiable demand. Belonging to Madoff's client list became the ultimate status symbol among elite social circles, particularly within wealthy Jewish communities in New York, Palm Beach, London, and Geneva. Country club locker rooms became viral engine rooms for the fraud. If a prospective investor asked too many questions about how the strategy worked, Madoff would coolly offer to return their money immediately, framing any skepticism as an insult to his prestige. Faced with the choice of demanding transparency or being cast out of the premier wealth machine in the world, investors routinely chose silence. As the years progressed, the sheer volume of money seeking entry outgrew Madoff's personal network, leading to the creation of feeder funds. These were third-party investment firms, hedge funds, and private banks that pooled capital from thousands of sub-investors around the globe and funneled it directly into Madoff's hands. Entities such as Fairfield Greenwich Group, Tremont Capital Management, and international banking giants like Banco Santander and Union Bancaire Privée gathered billions from clients, took massive management fees for performing due diligence, and passed the capital to the 17th floor without ever verifying whether a single trade was actually being executed. The feeder funds acted as a massive global amplifier, turning what might have been a regional scam into a web spanning continents. Inside the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building, the mechanics of the illusion were surprisingly low-tech. No actual trades were ever executed for Madoff's investment advisory accounts. Not a single share of stock was purchased, not a single option contract was written. Instead, a small team led by Madoff's longtime lieutenant, Frank D. Pasquale, utilized an ancient IBM AS/400 computer system to construct a parallel financial universe. Every morning, staff members would look at historical market data from previous days and weeks. They would select past high and low prices for major stocks, and then retroactively generate fake trade confirmations showing that Madoff had magically bought at the absolute bottom of a price move and sold at the absolute top. These fake records were printed on paper, aged in custom rooms to appear processed through official clearinghouses, and mailed out by the hundreds of thousands to clients. Account statements arrived every month, neatly formatted, displaying detailed stock tickers, options contracts, transaction dates, and steadily growing account balances. The illusion was seamless because Madoff paid every withdrawal request promptly and without hesitation. If an investor wanted $10 million to buy an estate in the Hamptons or fund a charitable endowment, the check arrived within days. This flawless liquidity convinced investors that the money was real, prompting many to redeposit their earnings or convince their relatives to transfer their entire life savings into Madoff's care. Yet, despite the flawless facade, the mathematical realities of the market meant that Madoff's scheme left a trail of undeniable anomalies. To purchase the volume of stocks and options Madoff claimed to hold for his clients, he would have needed to trade more options contracts on the Chicago Board Options Exchange than actually existed in the entire global financial market. Furthermore, if Madoff was executing these massive stock purchases, his trades should have left visible footprints on public market order books, yet no major European or American brokerage counterparty ever saw him on the other side of their trades. These glaring impossibilities caught the attention of a young, relentless financial analyst and portfolio manager from Boston named Harry Markopolos. In 1999, Markopolos was working at Rampart Investment Management when his superiors asked him to analyze Madoff's strategy so they could replicate its steady returns. Markopolos sat down with Madoff's reported performance numbers and a spreadsheet. Within 4 hours of mathematical analysis, Markopolos realized something was drastically wrong. The performance curve was mathematically impossible. If Madoff was trading the strategy he claimed, his returns should have fluctuated along with market volatility and option pricing models. Instead, the line was virtually straight. Markopoulos concluded there were only two possibilities: either Madoff was front-running his market-making order flow to insider trade, or the entire investment management business was a massive, fabricated Ponzi scheme. Driven by professional integrity and a deep mathematical obsession, Markopoulos became a whistleblower. In 2000, he submitted an 8-page detailed analysis to the Boston office of the Securities and Exchange Commission, outlining why Madoff was a fraud. The SEC ignored it. Over the next 8 years, Markopoulos repeatedly updated his submission, culminating in a legendary 2005 memorandum titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." In 29 distinct mathematical and operational red flags, Markopoulos demonstrated that Madoff could not possibly be trading the volume he claimed without the rest of the market noticing. He explicitly warned regulators that Madoff was operating a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme that would eventually collapse and devastate the financial system. The SEC's failure to act upon these warnings remains one of the most tragic regulatory blunders in financial history. When SEC staff members periodically conducted routine examinations of Madoff's office, they were thoroughly outmatched. Madoff treated young, inexperienced regulatory examiners with a mix of fatherly charm and subtle intimidation. He dropped names of senior SEC officials, offered tours of his market-making floor, and provided arbitrary, self-generated account numbers at the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. The examiners never took the elementary step of independently calling the clearinghouses or European banks to verify if the stocks and cash actually existed in Madoff's accounts. Satisfied by his standing as a Wall Street elder statesman, the agency repeatedly closed its inquiries, effectively giving Madoff a clean bill of health that he used to solicit even more capital from hesitant institutional funds. While regulators slept, Madoff's internal engine relied on a continuous influx of cash to pay out redemptions and keep the phantom machine alive. The primary bank account for the entire fraud was a single account at J.P. Morgan Chase, known internally as Account 703. Every check from an investor was deposited into Account 703, and every withdrawal check sent to an investor was drawn directly from it. At its peak, tens of billions of dollars flowed through this single commercial checking account. Instead of generating returns through market operations, Madoff was simply reshuffling cash from latecomers to early investors, while siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars to fund lavish lifestyles for his family, senior staff, and trusted insiders. The Madoff family lived an existence of quiet, unbridled luxury. They acquired waterfront estates in Montauk, Palm Beach, and Cap d'Antibes, along with private jets, megayachts, and priceless art collections. High-level employees on the 17th floor received millions of dollars in off-the-books bonuses, corporate credit cards with no spending limits, and low-interest personal loans that were never intended to be repaid. For nearly 20 years, the endless tide of new global capital covered the massive structural deficit created by these payouts and fabricated returns. But a Ponzi scheme is fundamentally a monster with an insatiable appetite. It requires ever-increasing amounts of new capital just to pay the baseline interest on the fake wealth it claims to hold. The fatal blow to Madoff's phantom empire came not from a regulatory bust or a whistleblower's victory, but from the systemic breakdown of the global financial system in 2008. The collapse of Bear Stearns in March of that year, followed by the catastrophic bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers in September, triggered a worldwide panic. Credit markets froze, equity prices cratered, and investors across the globe scrambled for liquidity. High-net-worth individuals, institutional hedge funds, and university endowments desperately needed cash to cover losses elsewhere in their portfolios. Naturally, they turned to their safest, most reliable asset, their accounts with Bernie Madoff. In late autumn 2008, redemption requests began pouring into the 17th floor at a terrifying rate. Investors who had treated Madoff as a liquid savings account demanded billions of dollars back all at once. By November 2008, investors had requested approximately $7 billion in redemptions. Madoff scrambled desperately to find fresh capital. He flew to Florida, met with wealthy offshore investors, and attempted to recruit institutional money under the guise of starting a new investment vehicle. But the global financial system was completely dry. No new money was coming in. By early December, the math was absolute and unforgiving. The paper account statements mailed to clients showed total portfolio values of nearly $65 billion. But inside Chase account 703, the actual physical cash remaining was roughly $200 to $300 million, a microscopic drop in the bucket compared to the billions being demanded. The game was over. The physical impossibility of satisfying $7 billion in redemptions with a few $100 million in cash meant that the collapse was no longer a matter of months or weeks, but hours. On December 9, 2008, Madoff called his longtime secretary, Eleanor Squillari, and told her that he was planning to distribute remaining funds early as employee bonuses. He drew up a list of millions of dollars in payouts to family members, close friends, and top staff. When his sons, Mark and Andrew, who worked on the legitimate trading side of the firm on the 19th floor, questioned why he was paying out employee bonuses months ahead of schedule while the firm was struggling to meet client redemptions, Madoff broke down. He invited them to his penthouse the following day to explain. It was during that emotional meeting on December 10, 2008, that Madoff surrendered to reality. Sitting in his living room, he confessed to his sons that the asset management business was a sham, that he was at the end of his rope, and that the entire operation was one big lie. Stunned by the revelation that their family's reputation, fortune, and life work were built on a generational fraud, Mark and Andrew Madoff immediately consulted criminal defense attorneys. Their lawyers gave them the only legal option available. They had to report their father to federal law enforcement immediately before they were implicated as co-conspirators. On the morning of December 11, 2008, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived at Madoff's penthouse. When asked by the arresting agents if there was an innocent explanation for the missing billions, Madoff calmly replied that there was no innocent explanation, admitting that he had spent the last several decades paying investors with money that simply didn't exist. The news broke across financial news networks like a seismic shockwave. The icon of Wall Street integrity, the man trusted by world leaders, charities, and ordinary citizens alike, was handcuffed and led away in full view of the global press. The destruction left in the wake of the revelation was total and immediate. Thousands of individuals opened their mail or logged into their online bank accounts to find that their entire net worth had evaporated overnight. Retired couples who had entrusted their life savings to Madoff were forced to sell their homes, apply for food assistance, or re-enter the workforce in their 70s and 80s. Renowned charitable foundations, including the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, saw their entire endowments wiped out, forcing them to cease humanitarian operations across the globe. Universities, hospitals, and cultural institutions were stripped of hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. The human cost was tragically expressed in lives lost. In December 2008, French aristocrat and finance veteran René-Thierry Magan de la Villehuchet, who had funneled over $1 billion of his clients' and his own family's wealth into Madoff's scheme through his firm Access International Advisors, was found dead in his New York office, having taken his own life after realizing the scale of the ruin. Exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, on December 11, 2010, Mark Madoff died by suicide in his Manhattan apartment, crushed by the relentless public scrutiny, endless lawsuits, and the weight of his father's betrayal. Years later, in 2014, Andrew Madoff succumbed to a recurrence of lymphoma, stating in interviews before his death that he never forgave his father for destroying their family. In the legal aftermath, the task of sifting through the smoking crater of Madoff securities fell to Irving Picard, a court-appointed trustee responsible for liquidating the firm and recovering assets for victims. Picard and his legal team embarked on an unprecedented global recovery effort that would last for over a decade. Utilizing clawback lawsuits under federal bankruptcy laws, Picard argued that investors who had withdrawn money from Madoff prior to the collapse, including profits that were actually cash stolen from newer investors, were legally obligated to return those funds so they could be distributed equitably among victims who had lost everything. Picard targeted the giant feeder funds, international banks, and early mega-investors who had ignored red flags or profited enormously from the scheme. Through relentless litigation, Picard achieved a feat that financial legal experts previously thought impossible: he recovered and redistributed more than $14 billion of actual lost principal, representing over 80% of the legitimate, out-of-pocket cash principal lost by Madoff's direct victims. While this recovery could never restore paper, profits, or mend broken lives, it set a historic precedent for victim recovery in corporate fraud cases. In June 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felony counts, including securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and perjury. He refused to cooperate fully with investigators or implicate others, attempting to portray himself as a lone mastermind who had acted without his family's knowledge. Federal District Judge Denny Chin sentenced the 71-year-old Madoff to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 150 years in federal prison, a symbolic lifetime sentence designed to reflect the sheer scale of evil and ruin he had inflicted. Madoff was sent to the Federal Correctional Institution in Butner, North Carolina, where he spent his final years living in a medium-security cell block, working in a prison facility, and talking to visiting journalists about his past. On April 14, 2021, at the age of 82, Bernie Madoff died in prison of kidney disease, leaving behind no inheritance, no remaining family reconciliation, and a legacy forever enshrined as the ultimate symbol of corporate greed and sociopathic deceit. The story of the Madoff fraud is far more than a tale of a clever criminal outsmarting the market. It is an enduring psychological case study on the vulnerabilities inherent in human nature and modern financial institutions. Madoff did not succeed merely because he was a master manipulator. He succeeded because the financial system around him was designed to reward authority, comfort, and deference to reputation over rigorous verification. Financial institutions that earned tens of millions of dollars in fees turned a blind eye to obvious mathematical anomalies because the money kept flowing. Regulators failed to investigate thoroughly because they were intimidated by institutional prestige and hamstrung by bureaucratic inertia. Investors surrendered their critical thinking because they were seduced by the intoxicating comfort of steady, risk-free returns and the social status of an exclusive club. Ultimately, the $65 billion phantom demonstrates that the most dangerous financial weapons are not high-risk derivatives or complex speculative bubbles, but the unexamined trust we place in figures of authority. Bernie Madoff proved that when elite credentials, social proof, and manufactured prestige are allowed to substitute for cold, hard proof and independent verification, even the most sophisticated markets on Earth can be transformed into a house of cards. The collapse of his empire stands as a timeless, sobering reminder that whenever an investment seems too good to be true, whenever a strategy claims to eliminate the natural laws of risk and reward, and whenever questions are met with demands for blind faith, a phantom is almost certainly at work in the shadows.